Hi everyone. Welcome to English Story School. Have you ever felt like your life was reduced to ashes, burned down by failures, betrayals, or shattered dreams? So much so that you thought you'd never rise again? What if I told you that this very moment, the one that feels like an end, is actually the beginning of something extraordinary? That deep within those ashes lies the spark of your rebirth. Welcome to a story that is not just about rising again, but about rising like a phoenix, bold, blazing, and bound for greatness. Chapter 1. The Fall When the Fire Consumes. They say, rock bottom will teach you lessons that mountaintops never will. And that's exactly where our story begins, with a man named Ryan. Ryan wasn't born with a silver spoon. He carved his own identity from sweat, grit, and late-night coffees. A small-town boy with fierce dreams, he rose like a meteor in the business world. At just 27, he had already built a tech company that people compare to Silicon Valley's best. His name was on magazine covers, TEDx stages, and the lips of investors who once laughed at his bold ambitions. People called him a prodigy, a visionary, even a disruptor. But here's what no one saw. Behind the media glare, the smiles, and the confident handshakes, Ryan was burning, silently, slowly, and dangerously. Success had come like a flood, but so did arrogance, blind trust, and overconfidence. The same friends who once toasted to his victories began plotting behind his back. One betrayed him in the boardroom, another stole company secrets. And amidst it all, Ryan never paused. He kept pushing, grinding, ignoring the cracks in his castle. Then came the storm, a global market crash. A single investor pulled out. The dominoes fell. Loans turned into lawsuits. Clients vanished overnight. Within a year, the empire he had built was nothing but ashes scattered in the wind. One cold, rainy evening, soaked to the bone, Ryan stood outside what used to be his apartment. An eviction notice trembling in his hands. The very building that once echoed with ideas, ambition, and late-night laughter now rejected him like a stranger. His clothes were drenched, his hands numb, and his soul shattered. He walked aimlessly through the empty streets and finally collapsed on a rusty old park bench under a flickering streetlight. A place once filled with childhood memories now felt like a graveyard of forgotten dreams. "Maybe I'm done," he whispered. The words didn't echo. They just fell, heavy and defeated, into the cold silence. That night, Ryan didn't cry because he was weak. He cried because he had been strong for far too long. He had held it in while everything fell apart, and now there was nothing left to hold. But as the rain fell like judgment from the sky, something flickered inside him. Faint but real. A memory. A quote his grandmother used to tell him when life seemed unfair. Ashes are not the end. They are the beginning where the phoenix awakens. And in that single moment, a small, rebellious part of him refused to die. But let's pause here, for this is where most people give up. When the world turns its back, when dignity is stripped away, and when even the mirror seems ashamed to reflect you, what keeps a man alive? Pride? Ego? No, it's the whisper of purpose, a reason, a memory, a flicker of who you once were, screaming not to be forgotten. Ryan sat still for hours, drenched and trembling, but alive, not in body, but in spirit. And for the first time in months, he wasn't thinking about the people who betrayed him or the money he lost. He was thinking about the boy who once believed he could change the world. That boy wasn't dead, just buried under pain, pressure, and noise. Sometimes it's in the deepest darkness that your soul finds its true fire. The next morning, Ryan didn't rise with a plan. He didn't have money, connections, or even a place to live. But he had one thing that even the richest man can envy: clarity. He spent the next week sleeping in shelters, eating at soup kitchens, and volunteering at community centers just to stay around people. Real people. People with stories, with pain, with grit. And in those humble moments, he started seeing life differently. He wasn't cursed. He was being carved. Every loss, every betrayal, every failure, they weren't punishments. They were chisels, sculpting him into something he never knew he could be. Something raw, something unbreakable. Sometimes life burns you down, not to destroy you, but to make sure you never forget how to rise. One afternoon, while helping a blind veteran cross the street, the man asked him, "Son, what do you do?" Ryan paused. He didn't want to say nothing, but he also didn't know who he was anymore. The man chuckled and said, "You look like someone who's been through hell, but you're still walking. That makes you dangerous in the best way." That sentence stuck with Ryan. Dangerous in the best way. Maybe that's what the fire had done. Burned away the ego, the distractions, the illusions. Now what remained was something real, something raw, something ready. The greatest version of you is often born in the ugliest season of your life. And so, in the most unexpected way, Ryan began his rebirth, not with a bank loan, not with a business plan, but with belief. Quiet, stubborn, burning belief. The fire that once consumed him had become the same fire that fueled him. This was not the end. This was the spark. Chapter 2. The Ember, the first spark. Ryan didn't rise the next morning with a cinematic glow or background music. He didn't wake up to applause or opportunity. He woke up on a stiff cot at a shelter, surrounded by silence and the quiet breath of men who had also lost everything. But unlike yesterday, there was a faint ember glowing inside him. Tiny, fragile, but real. He knew one thing now. Motion was medicine. So he started small. Baby steps. He took a job at a dusty old bookstore across town. It wasn't glamorous, didn't pay much, and most of the day involved shelving novels, cleaning coffee spills, and organizing author events that no one came to. But Ryan didn't care. Every book he touched felt like a whisper from the universe. Each page was a mentor. Each story was a mirror. And one quiet Tuesday, that mirror cracked open something powerful. A little girl, maybe 8, with oversized glasses and a backpack that nearly swallowed her, walked in. She nervously approached Ryan and asked, "Do you have a book about being brave? I need to be brave for my mom." Those words landed like lightning. He walked her to a shelf, pulled out a worn-out copy of The Lion Inside, and handed it to her gently. "This one helped me once," he said. She smiled, and just before leaving, she looked at him and whispered, "Thank you, brave man." He stood frozen, that ember inside him flaring for the first time. Not because of what he gave her, but because of what she gave him, a reflection of who he still was. Brave, capable, needed. That night, Ryan stared at his ceiling and remembered something he'd forgotten in the chaos of failure: his love for writing. The passion that once filled his college journals, late-night blogs, and old paperbacks now felt like a lifeline. He dusted off his old laptop from a donated bag and typed, and typed, and typed. His first piece was raw, honest, a letter to the very thing that shattered him. He titled it, "Dear Failure, Thank You." It wasn't perfect. It wasn't polished, but it was real. He didn't expect anyone to read it. He just needed to release it from his chest. But within 48 hours, the post went viral. Hundreds of shares, thousands of comments. People didn't just read his words, they felt them. Messages poured in. "You wrote what I couldn't say. This made me cry in the best way. I was about to give up. Then I read your post." One line from his post echoed across platforms, quoted, reshared, and tattooed into minds. "You don't drown by falling in the water. You drown by staying there." That quote didn't just speak to others. It stared back at Ryan like a mirror. That's when it clicked. People don't follow perfection. They follow truth. They follow pain that's been transformed into power. He realized he had spent so many years trying to look successful that he forgot how much more valuable it was to be authentic. It wasn't his story of rising that mattered. It was his story of breaking that became his fuel, his fire, his connection. In that moment, he made a decision, not just a dream, not a goal, a vow. He wouldn't just rise for himself. He would rise to help others rise too. He would become the voice for the broken, the light for those still crawling through tunnels, and a proof that resilience isn't a trait, it's a choice. Your scars are not signs of weakness. They're proof that the fire tried and failed. From there, Ryan wrote every day, in coffee shops, on buses, in bookstores, and under trees. His posts weren't structured essays, they were letters to souls. Titles like Surviving Sunday Nights, The Weight of Not Being Okay, and You Can't Break What's Already Rebuilt Stronger. And every time he clicked publish, more people showed up, not fans, fighters, survivors, believers. People tired of fake smiles, hollow inspiration, and Instagram-perfect life coaches. People who wanted to hear, yes, I broke. And yes, I bled. But I didn't quit. Slowly, Ryan built an online tribe. Then came the emails from schools, asking him to speak to students. Then came the calls from prisons, asking if his letters could be read to inmates. Then came the invitation from a mental health nonprofit, asking him to share his story of coming back from the brink. But even as he stood in front of his first crowd, nervously clutching the mic, he reminded himself, I'm not here to preach. I'm here to prove that rock bottom has a basement, but it also has a staircase. That's when everything changed, not in the way of fame or money, but in purpose. Ryan was no longer trying to build a company. He was building people. He wasn't chasing success. He was chasing significance. He didn't want to impress. He wanted to impact. That ember, once barely alive, now crackled with energy. And so, the boy who once sat broken on a park bench now stood as a man made of fire. Not the fire that burns down, but the one that builds upward. This wasn't a comeback. This was a revolution. Chapter 3, The Rise, Wings of Fire. With every sunrise, Ryan's life took on a new rhythm. It wasn't easy, but it was deliberate. Where once his mornings were drowned in regret and exhaustion, now they began with purpose. He launched a podcast, Ashes and Glory. Not just a title, it was a mission. A digital sanctuary for stories the world had forgotten. Voices the world had silenced. People who, like him, had burned and yet chosen to rise. His first episode featured a mother from Karachi who had lost her teenage son in a tragic accident. Instead of being consumed by grief, she used the insurance money to build a small school in her community, the House of Hope. When asked why, she said, I couldn't save my child's life, but maybe I could help save someone else's future. Ryan's audience broke. Thousands of comments poured in, tears, prayers, and promises to live better. Then came a man from Brazil. He had lost both his legs in a motorbike crash. He should have been another name lost to trauma. But he fought, trained, believed, and went on to win a Paralympic gold medal. He told Ryan during the episode, my legs were taken, not my fire. Each story added more wind beneath Ryan's wings. What once felt like scattered ashes were now shaping into something magnificent. Wings of fire. He wasn't flying yet, but he could feel the lift. Ryan began waking up at 4 a.m. every day. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to meet the day before it could beat him. He trained hard. His body that once slumped from emotional fatigue now stood tall, shoulders open, breathing strength. He wrote every night, stories, reflections, poems. Some went viral. Some didn't. But he kept writing because it was no longer about likes, it was about legacy. His podcast gained momentum fast. Invitations flooded in from universities, youth summits, even correctional facilities. People wanted to hear not just his story, but the stories he had collected. Ryan became a bridge between darkness and dawn. He wasn't unstoppable because life had gotten easier. He was unstoppable because he had gotten clearer, braver, deeper. You don't rise by avoiding fear, he said in one of his most famous podcast episodes. You rise when you make peace with it. But then, life reminded him that no one is ever done being tested. It came like a silent earthquake. His mother, his anchor, his guiding light, was diagnosed with a rare autoimmune disease. One day she was fine. The next, she was in the ICU, her body betraying itself. The news hit Ryan like a blow to the chest. He flew across the country and arrived at the hospital, watching the monitors blink and beep like some cold-hearted machine measuring her breath. This time, there was no podcast mic in his hand, no powerful quote to read, just pain, raw, quiet, unfair. He stood at the window of the hospital room. Rain tapped gently against the glass, almost like the night he had lost everything years ago. But this time was different. Back then, he had sat on a park bench in surrender. Now, he stood like a man who had fought through fire and had scars to prove it. He whispered, not for anyone else to hear, but for his soul. I rise again. For her. For me. For all of us. It was not a roar. It was a vow. Every night in that hospital, while the machines hummed and nurses passed by with tired eyes, Ryan would sit by his mother's side and read her the same stories he used to write for strangers online. Only this time, he wrote them for her. He began a new segment on his podcast called The Silent Soldiers, a tribute to caregivers, nurses, cancer survivors, and parents who sleep on hospital chairs. The world responded. Letters from ICU rooms, burn units, cancer wards, and trauma centers began pouring in. People shared how his words reached them during chemo, how one of his quotes helped a teenager talk his friend out of suicide. Sometimes the strongest people are the ones holding everyone else while silently breaking inside. Ryan wasn't just becoming a voice anymore. He was becoming a movement. His quotes began appearing on hospital walls, school brochures, and recovery centers. People weren't just listening to his words. They were living by them. His social media blew up. But even then, he never became arrogant, never detached. He responded to messages himself, cried over comments, and called fans warriors. Because that's what they were. And so was he. Not a hero, not a guru, just a man who refused to let his ashes be the end of the story. Instead, he turned them into wings. And every time life tried to burn him again, he walked straight into the flame, because now he knew. A phoenix doesn't avoid the fire. It walks into it, knowing it will come out reborn. And just like that, the boy who once doubted his worth was now leading thousands toward their own awakening. His rise wasn't loud. It was sacred. Chapter 4. The Flight, Soaring Beyond Limits. His mother recovered. Slowly at first. Shaky steps, tired smiles, and whispered duas. But day by day, life returned to her face like light creeping back after a long night. Ryan sat with her during her first walk outside the hospital. She looked up at the sky and said, "You gave me strength when I had none. Now go give that strength to the world." He didn't need more permission. The fire inside him, once kindled by pain, now roared with purpose. His podcast, Ashes and Glory, evolved into a global foundation. Not just a show anymore, but a movement that funded mental health therapy for teens, sponsored education for underprivileged youth, and helped trauma survivors rebuild their lives with dignity. Impact had replaced ambition. Ryan wrote his first book, Out of the Ashes into Greatness. It wasn't a biography. It was a mirror. Page after page reflected pain, strength, failure, and triumph. No glamour. No filters. Just truth. And people saw themselves in it. Within weeks, it became a bestseller across continents. Schools added it to their curriculum. Recovery centers used it in group therapy. Even inmates in prison requested copies, saying, "He speaks like he's been where we are." Then came a TED Talk. Ryan stepped onto the Red Circle stage, not in a designer suit, but in a plain black kurta his mother had gifted him. He didn't speak like a polished speaker. He spoke like a survivor who had turned his scars into syllables. Sometimes the lowest point of your life is just the foundation where your future will be built. Bird doesn't mean broken. It means rebirth. His voice didn't just echo in that auditorium. It thundered across the internet. 10 million views in 1 month. Subtitles translated into 26 languages. People around the world shared clips with a caption, "Watch this when you're ready to rise." But none of the fame, interviews, awards, or praise match what came next. The messages, thousands of them. Teenagers on the verge of giving up. Single moms working 3 jobs. Veterans battling PTSD. Addicts in recovery. Cancer patients between chemo sessions. All saying the same thing. "I thought I was done, until I heard your story." But one message made Ryan stop breathing for a moment. It came from a war refugee in Syria. A simple email. No fancy words. Just raw truth. "Your fire lit my coldest night. I live because you spoke." Ryan broke down again. But this time, not from exhaustion. From reverence. His tears were no longer from pain. They were from knowing that his journey wasn't just his anymore. He had become a torch. And when you carry fire, you become light for those trapped in darkness. He stood in front of the mirror that night and whispered to himself, "I was once the broken one. Now I am the bridge." From then on, he shifted everything. He declined TV interviews and brand deals that tried to commercialize his pain. He stopped chasing metrics and started chasing meaning. Every decision went through one filter. Will this help someone rise? He launched community healing circles in 18 countries. He created a mentorship program for teenage boys without fathers. He began funding art therapy programs for women who had survived abuse. And one by one, they came. The silent warriors, the bruised hearts, the broken souls who had nearly given up. They didn't come to worship him. They came to join him, because his message wasn't "look at me." It was "stand with me." And people stood, thousands, and then millions. He started being recognized at airports, cafes, and bookshops, not with selfies and screams, but with hugs, with trembling hands, with whispers like, "You saved my life. You helped me speak to my son again. Because of you, I finally forgave myself." One night, while returning from a conference in Nairobi, Ryan sat by the plane window, watching the stars pierce the night sky. He remembered the first time he sat on that park bench, years ago. Wet, defeated, forgotten. And now here he was, not just flying in the air, flying in purpose. "When you rise," he once said in a school speech, "you give others permission to rise too." That line became the heartbeat of everything. It was printed on wristbands, posters, notebooks, and even tattooed on arms across the world. It wasn't a catchphrase. It was a calling, a reminder that every soul who falls has the power to soar, if someone just reminds them they can. Ryan no longer feared failure. He had walked through fire. He had tasted dust. He had danced with darkness and still chosen light. He had soared, not because he had wings, but because he built them from the ashes. And he was just getting started. Chapter 5, The Flame Within, A New Dawn. Today, Ryan isn't just successful. He's significant. There's a difference. Success is fleeting, built on accolades and achievements. Significance is eternal, etched into the hearts of those you've touched, inspired, and uplifted. Ryan now stood not as a man who had climbed to the top, but as one who helped others find the way up. He wasn't just speaking, he was sparking. He didn't just motivate, he moved people, igniting fires in them that they didn't know existed. Ryan knew something profound now, something he hadn't understood when he first fell. It wasn't enough to simply rise. To truly find greatness, you had to help others rise with you. He often said, "We are all born with a phoenix inside us. Some of us just need a little heat to awaken it. And when you can wake up your own flame, you never stop burning." Ryan now stood as a symbol, not of perfection, but of possibility. He believed that everyone had the potential to turn their pain into power, their ashes into glory. It wasn't just some motivational speech he delivered. It was the truth of his life, embodied in every word. But he knew the journey wasn't just about him. He had seen what it felt like to be lost, to be alone, and to feel like the world was against him. He had felt the weight of hopelessness. Yet he had also seen how the human spirit could rise, how one can rebuild after losing everything. Today, Ryan had seen it all, and he had witnessed countless others rise along with him. He now spoke not from a podium or a conference room, but from a place of deep experience. Each story he shared, the tales of his own collapse and his eventual resurrection, served as a torch for others to follow. And people listened. They didn't just hear his words, they felt them. They could see his scars, feel his struggle, and find hope in their own battles. But Ryan knew his purpose was far greater than fame, followers, or fortune. Every time he reached someone, it wasn't just his story they were connecting with. It was their own. One day, as he was walking through a park after a speech, a young man came up to him, hesitant at first. Ryan smiled, gesturing for him to sit. They exchanged pleasantries, and then the young man spoke. "I was about to end it all, but I saw your TED Talk, and something inside me clicked. It was like you were speaking directly to me." Ryan didn't say anything for a moment. He didn't need to. Sometimes the most powerful words are the ones left unspoken. Instead, Ryan simply looked at the young man and said, "You weren't supposed to be finished. You were just being prepared for the rise." That moment, simple yet profound, became a turning point for the young man. His life was forever changed, just as Ryan's had been when he first found the courage to get up. And that was the power of Ryan's journey. It wasn't just about his own rise. It was about creating a wave of transformation, one that carried countless others. People didn't just see Ryan. They saw the reflection of their own potential. His victory became their victory. Now, Ryan's message was clear. You're not done. You are becoming. That was the mantra that he repeated with every story, every speech, every post, and every conversation. He believed that every scar had a story. Every failure had a lesson. Every heartbreak had a purpose. And every single person, no matter their past, had a phoenix inside them. Ryan knew that the journey would never be easy for anyone. Pain would come. Challenges would arise. But it was all part of the process. Growth was born from adversity. And the fire, although it might burn, would never consume. It would transform. He posted a picture on his social media once. It was of a wall in his office with the quote, "I didn't rise in spite of the fire. I rose because of it." That quote, his personal mantra, became the driving force behind everything he did. And the world began to listen. People started sharing their own stories of resilience and recovery. They used his words to fuel their own transformation. Communities were built around his message, and Ryan's legacy began to form not just as a man, but as a movement. But even now, Ryan knew he was just one part of something bigger. He didn't create the phoenix. He simply showed others how to uncover it within themselves. Now, his work continued, and with it, an ever-growing army of phoenixes, each rising from their own ashes and finding their own greatness. And as he looked out over the world he had changed, Ryan whispered the words he had come to live by. Let your scars become your story. Let your failure fuel your flight. Let your ashes be your armor. Because that, in the end, was the true power of the phoenix. The fire didn't destroy it. It transformed it. It made it stronger, wiser, and ready to soar again. With that said, thanks for watching, and until next time.